This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
Thank you all for coming. You're very welcome to this latest installment of our series. So it's a series that the Institute of Modern Languages Research is running together with the University of Nottingham under the theme of encounters, and we always invite an author with their translator to have a conversation about their work. And I'm really very excited about this event today. It's wonderful to have Ulrike Draesner here and Lyn Marven. And we have so much to talk about that I've decided to do this introduction very, very briefly only, because you can go on the websites, you can find out more. I just want to give some very brief words of introduction and then really leave the floor to Ulrike and Lyn to discuss the work. So let me just say briefly, Ulrike Draesner is a novelist, a poet, and an author of essays. And I think that's really important for our circle today. She's also a translator, and she's very much lived in the English and the German culture and language for such a long time that she is a very good judge of translations, I think, and has a lot to say herself about translating her own texts. Her work is plentiful and varied, and I don't want to do a whole list of what she has written, but let me just mention a few things. So there's a novel called Mitgift, which I think is of some relevance to what we're doing today, because there as well the focus is on the relationship between identity and body, which comes to the fore in the text that we're going to discuss as well. There are several collections of short prose, one of them Richtig liegen, yeah. And the text that we are dealing with today, Rosa Käfer, was first published in that collection. Ulrike has also written poetics or texts on poetics and essays on various topics. Most importantly, I think, about the topic of literature and science, and in what ways literature can bridge the way to scientific understanding. Of her translations, I just want to mention one, the Radikalübersetzung, I think that's your word for them, of Shakespeare's sonnets, which came out under the title Twin Spin. And they are really translations in a very, very wide sense. They're more adaptations than what we normally understand to be translations. And finally, I do want to mention she has received numerous high-profile and prestigious prizes, amongst them the Solothurn Literaturpreis and the Joachim-Ringelnatz-Preis for poetry, which really is the highest accolade you can have for poetic work in Germany. She's currently spending a year as a visiting fellow at the University of Oxford, and there's going to be, for those of you who are free to go and interested, there's going to be a colloquium on Ulrike's work on the 11th to the 13th of April in Oxford. And if you want to know more about that, ask Karen.
Or Lyn.
Or Lyn.
Indeed, yes.
I also want to introduce to you Lyn Marven, who is a senior lecturer in German at the University of Liverpool, but she's also a published translator, especially of modern and very modern texts, recent German texts. Among these, probably the best known is the book that came out in 2009 of Berlin Stories, which she selected, wrote an introduction to, and translated. And they are stories which feature Berlin and really make you feel Berlin in a particular way. And they span from early 20th century to very recent texts. And then there's another collection of tales coming out very soon?
May, I believe.
In May, okay.
Yeah, I believe it when I see it. I should say that on the back.
So that's a collection of tales all by Larissa Boehning, published in German as Schwalbensommer, and the English translation will be Swallow-Summer. Thank you. Okay, so let's leave it at that, and what we would like to do now is we've asked Ulrike to read the beginning of this text, Rosa Käfer, and at the same time we'll have Lyn's translation up on the screen, so you have to work on 2 tracks. You have to listen to one and see the other, and then we'll turn that round, and Lyn will be reading her translation, and we will see the original on the screen. So, just get the this one.
Erst einmal guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren. Ich freue mich sehr, hier zu sein. Und ich bin den ganzen Tag durch London gelaufen und war dann richtig froh, als das Senate House vor mir erschien. Und jetzt bin ich besonders froh, hier zu sein und 2 Dinge tun zu dürfen, die ich heute noch gar nicht getan habe. Zum einen 2 Stunden zu sitzen und zum anderen zu reden. Und das ist natürlich wunderbar, damit zu beginnen, einen eigenen Text vorzulegen. Rosa Käfer. Als Rosa Marek am Morgen nach unruhigen Träumen erwachte, lag sie auf dem Rücken, fest in ihrem Bett, einem niedrigen Futon, und fand sich in der angenehmen Lage, sich leicht von einer Seite zur anderen schaukeln zu können. Wie ein Kind im Wiegenkorb schloss sie die Augen. Erst als das Wegklingeln des Handys ungewöhnlich lange ausblieb, öffnete sie erneut die Lider. Das Schaukeln endete abrupt. Sie hob den Kopf und sah einen gewölbten, braunen Bauch. Normalerweise hatte sie keinen Bauch. Die Bettdecke reichte nur mit einem Zipfel über die groteske Rundung. Rosa wollte lachen. Was hatte sie gestern Abend gegessen? Sie riss die Augen zu. Lachen ging nicht. Stattdessen kehrte das schaukelige Gefühl zurück. Nun, schlauer, blinzelte sie nur. Die im Verhältnis zum Bauchumfang kläglich dünnen, zahlreichen Beine flimmerten ihr vor Augen. Sie hatte sich immer dünne, wenigstens dünnere Beine gewünscht. Bei diesem Gedanken weinte sie. Die Leiste des Videorekorders zeigte kurz nach 8. Munter sprangen die Striche zu neuen Zahlen zusammen. Seit einer Stunde sollte Rosa eingeloggt sein. Sie schlief, Öffnungen fest im Blick. Erst vor kurzem hatte sie mit ihrer Mutter das Zimmer auf Feng Shui umgeräumt. Vor Rosa die Tür zum Wohnzimmer, rechts die zu ihrem Bruder, links die Computer, das Fenster, die Ports. Auf dem Drehstuhl ihre Kleider, unterm Schreibtisch ein paar Handeln. Es musste ihr nur gelingen, auf den Stuhl zu klettern und sich die Telefonanlage umzuhängen. Mit etwas Glück war ihr Fehlen bislang unbemerkt geblieben. Da erinnerte sie sich an die Testrunden. Jedes Login wurde von der Zentrale überwacht. Als ein kleiner roter Punkt schwamm ihr Anschluss im Meer der Anfragen weltweit. Sie atmete tief, das Plumeau rutschte von ihrem Bauch. Breit, rund, rosa. Unbeherrschbar fuhren die befreiten Beinchen durch die Luft, als wollten sie Propeller spielen. Versuchte Rosa eines einzuknicken, war es das erste, das sie streckte. Gelang es ihr, mit diesem Bein auszuführen, was sie sich vorgenommen hatte, arbeiteten alle anderen in höchster Aufregung dazwischen. Das Gezucke erinnerte an grotesk vergrößerten Sex. Rosa musste kichern. Eine Frau mit ihrem Bauchumfang konnte nur unglücklich oder schwanger unglücklich sein. Im Vergleich dazu ging es ihr gut. Das Leben hat ihr beigebracht, nicht als tragisch zu nehmen. Opfer war uncool. Entschieden riss sie die Lider auf. Das Fensterglas wirkte trübe, als regne es. Trotz der langen Nachtruhe fühlte Rosa sich lächerlich müde. Dennoch kippte sie sich hin und her, schaukelte aber immer wieder in die Rückenlage. Sie versuchte wohl 100 Mal auf die linke Seite zu kommen, um ordentlich aus dem Bett zu steigen, schloss die Augen, damit sie die zappelnden Beine nicht sah, und ließ erst ab, als sie in der Seite einen unbekannten, leicht dumpfen Schmerz fühlte. Der Bildschirmschoner sprang an. Rosas Mühen mussten ihn, wenn auch mit Verspätung, wachgerufen haben. Erschöpft starrte Rosa auf das Foto eines jungen Mannes, den ihr das Zufallsprogramm aus dem Netz gesogen hatte. Der in einen altmodischen Überzieher und Hut gekleidete, warf einen langen, nur wenig schrägen Schatten auf das ihn umgebende Kopfsteinpflaster. Das Haus hinter ihm zeigte altmodische Konturen. Am unteren Rand der Aufnahme glänzte ein auffallend schwarzer, hoch aufgewölbter Schuh. Der andere Fuß des Abgebildeten ragte ganz aus dem Bild. Rosa machte kurzen Prozess und warf sich vom Futon. Der geringen Höhe wegen kam sie auf der Seite auf. Es gelang ihr aber, sich mit dem Schwung des Falls auf die Beine zu drehen. Sofort lief sie zum Stuhl. Weder die Telefonanlage noch der Computer interessierten sie noch. Sie dachte einzig daran, die Schublade ihres Schreibtischs zu erreichen, in der sie Müsli-Riegel, Schokolade und Bonbons bewahrte. Alles, was sich unauffällig zwischen zwei Anrufen kaum ließ. Welch Segen, diese Voraussicht. Einer altertümlichen Klopfvorrichtung gleich hing der Schubladengriff in zwei kleinen, starren Gelenken nach unten. Der Schreibtisch zählte zu den Erbstücken der Familie. Sie musste mit aller Kraft daran ziehen. Es machte wohl einigen Krach. Gerade als die Schublade nachgeben wollte, klopfte es an die Tür, die Rosa mit dem Wohnzimmer verband. Was sie da treibe? Es sei spät, sogar Rainer gehe schon los. Rosa biss sich auf die Lippen. Lippen hatte sie also noch. Ihr Bruder, ein kindisches 14-jähriges Wesen, musste zur Schule. Sie arbeitete, zahlte mit ab. Gerufen hatte Claudia, natürlich. Die klopfte nun in rascher Folge. Wieder ließ man Rosa keinerlei Zeit für sich. Das rief sie auch hinaus. Weil sie sich im gleichen Moment über sich ärgerte, hängte sie ein versöhnlicheres „Komme sofort" an. Welch Schnarren war ihr entfahren. Die eigene Stimme hatte Rosa nie recht gefallen. Beim Singen war es am ärgsten. Selbst Stimmbruch Rainer hatte sie mühelos übertroffen. Nun waren die ersten Worte klar und deutlich herausgekommen. Der Rest, knapp vorm Gaumen, aber gluckend, in ihm stecken geblieben. Sie wollte sich auf Claudia ausrichten. Die Drehung verlangte so auf der Stelle einiges Koordinationsgeschick, das sich, als Rosa nicht mehr über die Führung der neuen Lieder nachdachte, ganz von selbst einstellte. Mühelos trugen die dünnen Beine den Körper. Sie spürte keinerlei Ziehen der Muskeln, erstarrte aber, da sie entdeckte, dass ihr nutzloser Bruder still und heimlich seine Tür zu ihr geöffnet hatte. Wollte denn heute gar nichts so laufen wie sonst? Rainer saß in der Schule oder unter dicken Kopfhörern am Computer. Zusätzlich bewegte er sich nur, wenn man ihn in den Schulsport gezwungen hatte. Danach stürzte er gern zu Rosa ins Zimmer und versuchte, sie während des Telefonierens zu pieksen oder eines ihrer Geräte zu entführen. Auch jetzt rannte er herein, packte blind den kleinsten Computer, streckte die Hand nach dem Netzgerät. Sie musste nur seinen Namen rufen, nicht einmal streng. Rainer drehte sich um, öffnete den Mund, ließ ihn geöffnet, klappte ihn zu, stumm, öffnete ihn wieder, japste, Rosa ist ein Käfer, und war samt Rechner weg. Okay. Sie mal gucken, das letzte Wort auch.
probably gathered that, of course, there isn't just one text being read and one text. On the screen, there's at least one more text, or one text in 2 languages, and at least 2 versions of that going on at the same time here. And I imagine that's probably where we're going to start talking. You'll have noticed one major change right at the beginning as well. Rose beetle. When Rose Granser woke in the morning after uneasy dreams, she was lying on her back, right there in her bed, a low futon, and to her pleasure, she found herself able to rock gently from one side to another. She closed her eyes like a cat. We've cat. I don't know. A child in a cradle. It was only some time later, when the alarm on her mobile phone apparently failed to go off as usual, that she opened her eyes again. The rocking stopped abruptly. She lifted her head and saw a curved brown belly. Normally she didn't have a belly. Her duvet barely covered the grotesque rotundity. Just a single corner met the bed. Rosa felt like laughing. What had she eaten last night? She quickly opened her eyes. No laughter came. Instead, the rocking feeling returned. The second time around, she was cunning and opened her eyes just a crack. Legs, lots of them, jiggled in front of her eyes. They were pitifully thin compared to the circumference of her belly. She'd always wanted thin legs, or thinner legs at any rate. Now the thought made her cry. The display on the video recorder was showing just after 8. The impatient lines kept reassembling themselves into new numbers. Rose should have logged on an hour ago. She slept with doors directly in the line of sight. She and her mother had recently rearranged the room according to the principles of feng shui. The door to the living room was directly in front of Rose. The door to her brother's room on the right. To the left was her computer, the window and the pods, her clothes lying on top of her office chair, a pair of barbells under the desk. All she needed to do was clamber up onto the chair and drape the headset around herself. With a bit of luck, no one would have noticed her absence yet. Then she remembered the training sessions. Each login was monitored by head office. Her connection was a little red dot swimming in a global sea of queries. She inhaled deeply, and the quilt slid off her belly, big and round, Rose. Now they were liberated, her little legs waved around uncontrollably in the air, as if they were pretending to be propellers. If Rose tried to tuck one leg in, that one was the first to pop out. If she managed to get this particular leg to do what she wanted, then the others would be working 10 to the dozen trying to get in the way. All the jerking around was reminiscent of sex on a grotesque scale. Rosa couldn't help giggling. A woman of her girth could only be unhappy, or expecting, or expectantly unhappy. But everything was going well for Rose. Life had taught her not to view everything as a tragedy. Being a victim was not cool. Feeling determined now, she opened her eyes fully. The window pane was clouded over as if it were raining. Despite her long night of rest, Rose felt ridiculously tired. Nevertheless, she kept trying to tip herself over one way or another, but always ended up rocking onto her back again. She must have tried 100 times to roll onto her left side in order to get out of the bed in an orderly fashion, closing her eyes so she didn't have to see the wriggling legs, and only gave up when she felt an unfamiliar, faint, dull pain in her side. The screensaver sprang to life. Rose's exertions must have woken it up again, albeit rather late. Exhausted, Rose stared at a young man whose photo had been plucked from the internet by the randomising software. Dressed in an old-fashioned overcoat and hat, he cast a long and slightly oblique shadow on the cobblestones that surrounded him. The house behind him revealed an old-fashioned facade. A shiny and unusually black shoe arched into view at the bottom of the photo. The subject's other foot was sticking out of the picture completely. Rose summoned her strength and launched herself off the futon. There wasn't far to fall, so she landed on her side, but then managed to use the momentum to flip over onto her feet. She immediately ran over to the chair. She wasn't interested in the headset or the computer anymore. All she could think about was getting to the drawer in her desk, where she kept cereal bars, chocolate and sweets, anything she could chew discreetly in between phone calls. What a blessing it was to have foresight. The drawer handle hung down on 2 rigid joints like an antique door locker. The desk was one of the family heirlooms. She had to pull on it with all her weight. It must have made quite a noise. And just as the drawer was about to give, there was a knock at the door between Rose and the living room. What was she doing in there? It was late. Rainer was about to leave already. Rose bit her lips. So she still had lips then. Her brother, a childish thing of 14, still went to school. She was working to help pay everything off. It was Claudia who had shouted, obviously. And now she kept knocking on the door over and over. Yet again, Rose wasn't allowed any time to herself. She yelled as much back. And because she immediately regretted it, she added a conciliatory, "Just coming!" What was the humming noise that was coming from her? Rose had never really liked her own voice. Singing was the worst. Even Reiner of the breaking voice was effortlessly superior. Now her first words had come out loud and clear, but the rest got stuck inside, turning into a gurgle just before they reached her gums. She decided to head towards Claudia. Turning on the spot like this required some skill, but the coordination came automatically once Rose was no longer consciously trying to direct her new limbs. The thin legs supported her body with ease. She didn't feel her muscles straining at all, but she froze to the spot when she realised that her good-for-nothing brother had quietly opened the door between his room and hers without her noticing. Was everything out of sorts today? Reiner spent his time either at school or sitting at the computer with fat headphones on. His only form of exercise was when he was forced to take part in games lessons at school. Afterwards, he liked to burst into Rose's room and would try to poke her while she was on the phone or to make off with one of her devices. He ran in now too, blindly grabbed the smallest computer and then reached for the router. All she had to do was call his name. She didn't even need to say it sharply. Reiner turned around, opened his mouth, left it hanging, shut it mutely, opened it again and gasped, "Rose is a beetle!" Then he disappeared on the computer. A beetle!
You found it!
And there we are.
There we are. Thank you so much. I have lots of questions, but I think it's probably best to just leave you both discussing things between you, and then we'll come in with questions afterwards. If you want your presentation, do you want that, or yeah? Could do.
Yes, why not?
It's up to you. So,
We can at least put the first bit out.
Exactly. Or not. Or yeah, exactly.
Perhaps you can't.
Or not.
Shall we talk about the name?
Yeah.
Because that was the big,
Yes, yeah.
the big
I
name.
don't mind where we start.
Let's see what.
It's trying to leave you to struggle with the computer.
Yeah.
You'll probably have noticed that the first major change was the name of the character, obviously. And we talked about this. There's no reason not to keep Rosa Mari, but obviously because we were going to talk about it, I thought we might as well play around with it. I did also enlist the help of my dad, who loves doing anagrams for crosswords, but he sadly didn't come up with anything better.
So perhaps you should start with the information.
Yes.
So Rosa Marek is an anagram on Gregor Samson. That's how I kind of came up with that name. And it seemed to me to be vital because I was thinking about strategies of establishing a relationship to Kafka and at the same time changing it around. And so Rosa Marek sounded not too artificial and not too obvious, but you could find it. Now, actually, our questions arose not only on the name, but indirectly because indirect dependence of the title.
Indeed, yes.
Because here, again, you have a Rosa and a Rosa, and of course, it's like the color and the first name. But if you translate, you come up with a lovely thing, like a lily beetle.
Oh, I would have loved a lily beetle.
A lily beetle, which
far
is
too
a
far away.
real beetle, it's a beautiful one as well, but I thought it's too real, actually, because it kind of would pin you down on a very specific beetle, which I would like to avoid, actually.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Lily, otherwise we could have thought about, give her the French name Lily, but we don't get to the Greek or something like that. So this topic left us with your qualms about Rosa Marek and the Kafka context.
Yes. well, one of the things that I wanted to do was to have a title that made sense, and there is a rose beetle, a rose chafer, apparently. That would have been a bit too far. It's not necessarily called that. There is an official one. If I could get this presentation, I'll be able to see a picture of it, but I don't know what's going on. It might be worth pulling the USB out and trying again.
Try again.
But it seems to be quite frozen.
Yeah, completely frozen.
Yeah, those.
Come on, let's see what happens.
There we go. Try again. But the question with the name is partly, obviously, to do with the title. So I wanted a title that, like so many of your short stories, has a couple of different meanings. So there's the title of Hot Dogs, for example, is, of course, evoking hot dogs, the thing you eat, but has some literally hot dogs in it. So there's always a play in the title. So Rosa Beetle was too obviously a name, if we translated it like that. So Rose Beetle was the nearest thing that I could find, obviously, that fits. And I thought, in the end, if we have to change that, then we have to change the whole name. And I went for something that was, again, a near anagram, but it sounds much closer to Clegor Samsa. I mean, Kamsa rhymes, at least. It's the beginning of Clegor and the end of Kamsa. And I thought, probably for an English-speaking audience, you need more of a hint, actually, because the anagram is almost by the by. As soon as you see that German sentence, you know that there's Kafka behind this. You don't need the anagram, although it's there as well. Whereas perhaps the English sentence won't be quite as obviously Kafka, so we thought perhaps something that's a bit more of a heavy hint would work in the name. And so Gramsa was the kind of portmanteau that we came up with, and I came up with, and we thought in the end that would work.
Well, there's something, like if you go on, just bit by bit perhaps, and then we might enlarge on some questions that just struck me when I listened. This first paragraph, actually in the German, is modeled fairly closely to the first paragraph by Kafka, because we really wanted to make it clear to people, you know, there is Kafka, and here we start off, and there's this kind of, there's a comment paragraph.
Yes,
But then I obviously branch off somewhere else, and all the kind of changes I add will come to bear. And this is one of the reasons. Do you have the Kafka here as well?
I've got the very first bit, and I've got...
It would be useful to have him.
That as well.
I didn't print him out. Never rely on computers.
I've got the very beginning. I can pull up.
Yes.
That's fine. No, that's fine. So what I did in my German sentence at the beginning, I wanted to leave in the bet, for example, because he used it in. And I also wanted to add something to it and change it. So my first sentence says, Fest in ihrem Bett einen niedrigen Futon. So that's why we have the doubling. You would read the Kafka as you just said, you know, it's just the structure of a sentence, you would ring a bell, there's many people. And then there's this kind of Störgeräusche. So now if you translate this into English, and I don't know anything about English translations of the Verwandlung, and then there's one which is kind of superseded all the other ones, or whether they're kind of, you know, in equal terms, whatever.
Well.
There wouldn't be a standard. So it doesn't make sense to have this in English. Why would you have a doubling in English there? You know, and I just had a go on the first paragraph myself. So get out of the bed, you know, you just don't need it. If you can't recognize it as being part of the original, the futon does the job. So, you know, this is, I think this is a very basic point now about translation. What do I need to translate? Where can I, you know, what kind of information is given? Obviously, the semantics information embedded in futon is kind of redundant. And if it doesn't work as a kind of literary illusion, you just get rid of it. Please, I would say, you know, so get rid of it. Be very economical in what you are doing. So it wouldn't work, because obviously there is no proper canonical, it wouldn't ring a bell. So we don't need a bed. So this is a very
what does ring a bell, actually, And I also teach the translations of Kafka in one of our modules. So I have much greater in-depth knowledge of all various translations of Die Verwandlung than is necessary for any one person, I suspect. But it's in my head now. And so I went back to 4 different versions while I was doing particularly the first paragraph here. I had 4 different versions of the English Kafka open, as well as yours, Die Verwandlung. So there were lots of different texts playing around here. And you can see, obviously, in that very, very first phrase, really, the first clause, there are a couple of changes already. And as you can see, the first lines in English also don't match up. So the Muirs, if anything, the Muirs being the first translation, will be the thing that is canonical, if anything is. And what I found is that, as you can see, there's a difference between as and when, so the process of waking up, or the when. In your version, I thought when worked better. But the uneasy and troubled dreams is where it stops being one accepted version. Actually, that's where the translators start to make decisions about the unruhig. And I thought, well, I have to go for one of those. And if you Google it, which I did, I like seeing collocations and how common they are when I'm working with the translation. Troubled dreams is much more common. It's twice as common as uneasy dreams. But Kafka turns up on the first page of Google if you put in uneasy dreams. So insofar as you're playing with something that you want to try and sound familiar, then uneasy dreams had to be the one. So I wouldn't have chosen either of them if I was translating it. Restless.
Yes, lovely.
Because it should be restless sleep, but it's restless dreams, and I quite like that mismatch. Yes. So I was trying to hold back from how would I translate Kafka. But also, because the Kafka was there, I was slightly holding back from what I would have done with the text in order to make it try and sound familiar if somebody knows Kafka in English. That's the problem, because I know the Kafka in German, you know the Kafka in German, but that's not what needs to be behind this English version of Rosa Käfer. It has to be the English translations. And as you can see, they start getting more different after you move away from that first clause. And the bed is really problematic in the translations because it's really awkward where it fits in a sentence.
Yes,
so he found himself transformed, needs into immediately afterwards. That in English needs to go together. So in his bed is already disrupting that sentence in English. We get the same in Hoffmann no, there we are. Hoffmann solves it by putting it at the end, but then that sounds completely redundant. So it's hanging there as well. He found himself changed into a monstrous cockroach. I should just do that. We can all ponder cockroach in his bed, and that just sounds, as you say, completely odd at the end of the sentence. Crick drops it completely. So there we have no bed whatsoever. And then Bronowski was where I came back to, and Susan Bronowski's written quite a lot of very interesting articles about her translation of Die Verwandlung, which is relatively recent, and 2014, as you can see. And it has an introduction by David Cronenberg, as in the director of The Fly, which is very appropriate. And she decided to put the in your bed completely in her face. So she brings in right there in his bed, because that emphasis then justifies it being there in that place in the sentence, and it does draw attention to it, and it of course draws attention to the oddity. And I thought, well, that's a good solution.
It is, absolutely.
Because you've got fest in ihrem bed.
Yes.
And what to do with fest?
Yeah, right.
I thought, well, Susan Bronowski's already done it.
Yeah, no.
I'll have that. Thank you very much.
I did it first. Why would
Indeed, yes, they got it right. I shall have to ask her.
Yes, so because I felt something needs to be in there.
Well, exactly. It needs to be.
Yeah, for the rhythm of
Yeah, to justify the fact that redundant information is there.
Lovely. I like this, you know, so fascinating. Yes.
So actually, the translation of that text went via the others, and there's a few other places actually, having been reading around a little bit more, where I might bring in slightly more of the language from the Kafka translations. The drawer, which he calls in it with all the weight, I really wanted strength, but I just used that at the beginning of the paragraph.
That's lovely.
And actually might is something that comes up as a bit of a Kafka type word, so I think that's going to sneak in there as well.
There's another issue coming up with the next part of the phrase. Und fand sich in der angenehmen Lage, sich leicht von einer Seite zur anderen schaukeln zu können. And of course, like the German Lage is a marvelous version of this situation because it implies liegen.
Yeah.
And it's very visual, and you know exactly how she's lying there, what the kind of, what the movement would be. And I just feel, but correct me if I'm wrong, she found herself able to, it's just too weak.
I know.
It's just too weak, you lose everything, it's just a common phrase. Sich in der Lage finden is much stronger than nur können.
Yeah.
What I
But it's
really
really
think, I
she
should
was
think
only
about,
in a position,
I'm
yeah.
using my lovely position being the author.
Well, position
Just
is
I
the word.
criticise,
Yeah.
so I don't have a solution.
Well, no, absolutely. Because I wanted to have, she found herself. Because again, that's something that belongs in the English Kafka version. So that's a familiar phrase.
And it's nice as well.
But she found herself in a position to be in, to rock gently. I couldn't fit all the elements in. And so the thing that had to go was in a position to. Because you could do that if you said she was in a position to, or she realised she was in a position to, but it's starting to get quite elaborate. And to me, the found herself was the important bit. That again just says Kafka completely.
Right, but the angenehm is the important bit for me, because
Indeed.
I just wanted to start with the kind of sensual bodily feelings. Like before you have the visual shock, there is some bodily perception, and that's why it's just nice.
To her pleasure.
Yes, because everybody would already, this is something about writing after Kafka, so I assume people would know Kafka. It's quite likely, when they found my story, that would be reader. So they would all know what the shock is. Nobody would be shocked or surprised. So the surprise has to come in a different way. So let's start. We all know he's going to be a Beatle. It's only stupid Ryan who's astonished. But the surprise for the reader might be that the first sensuous impression he gets are really, it's nice, I mean, let's forget about the legs. The legs not nice, but the feeling, so having this quite wide body and being like in a cradle. How lovely.
Yeah. Well, yeah, to her pleasure, I thought, gets almost a kind of sexual sense.
Yeah, I should avoid that. As far as it can be, but
it's not quite.
Like indulging yourself in a bath might be the kind of horizon around.
Yeah. But then, of course, it does say later on that it was reminiscent of all the journey around it.
Grotesque.
So. Yes, indeed.
Can I ask a question? I think this is totally fascinating, and but you've already given us quite a good insight into how it works and what you've been doing. It seems to me that it's a double process of translating, isn't it? Because you are in a way translating Kafka, and then you're translating the translation. So it's not the direct access. There's something. Yeah, it's a sort of Dreisprung, isn't it?
Yes, and even this is a dynamic process, because obviously one way of relating to Kafka becomes more and more abstract as the story proceeds, because I follow the plot line, like having the three meter in and all these, the person of the plot, but it gets quite free and, invention wins over. Just in order to return to a translation of the tram into a helicopter. Right, so this would be dynamic and quite complex.
Yeah.
But the phrases come back. So later on, the bit about trying 100 times to roll over onto the side, that's very, very Kafka, and that's very, very similar vocab in a slightly different context. So it comes earlier on in Kafka, and he's trying to roll onto his right side, and that's because he's trying to get comfortable and go back to sleep, whereas here he's trying to get out to bed. But the language is still there as well. But as you say, it starts to be, it's very condensed in the first paragraph, and then it just pops up as little reminders. And it takes us 4 pages to get to Kiev.
Yes. It's everybody will know it already, so why should I mention it?
starting point, I think, is a really good term, isn't it? So Kafka is a starting point. And is it more than that? Is it also a framework that helps you sort of set the story going? But then
I think I like your introduction of translation process into this already. So obviously what I did, I do translate Kafka into a different world, genders change, and media and reports of media. So it's transferred from then to today. And this is a translation, and I just wanted to make sure that everybody really gets, the joy of it. So that's why I glue the first paragraph linguistically onto Kafka, and then I just start off and take more and more liberties. And sometimes just to remind readers, there might be a single phrase kind of quoted. And I think an important other issue, which takes us further on into the text, because you had just shown it, or I saw it there was this photograph of Kafka. I'm really so happy, you took it, you had it, you found it, you got the clue, because this is of course what springs up on the screen. And I try to describe exactly this photograph. And there arises another issue for the translation, because after the paragraph where exactly this photo is described, where was it, der Bildschirmschoner sprang an, so, ein auf ein schwarzer, hoch aufgewölbter Schuh, der andere Fuß des Abgebildeten ragte ganz aus dem Bild, which I slightly exaggerate, but it's not entirely invented, but I really wanted to emphasize this, so this is the author, it's left the story. And then the next paragraph continues with, Rosa machte kurzen Prozess. So, now of course this is a key word, which you didn't get in. Again, I can't. It's probably translated like, what's the title? It's the process. Is it? It's trial. Yes. So what a trial.
You do have the Vorbereitung earlier, the Testwunden.
Yeah.
So but they're not really.
Try would then be try to go for. Because I do imply in a way that we are so close to her, it's in her perspective, that she might even recognize him or have a kind of faint that might be ringing in her head that this is Kafka. She might be aware of finding herself in a Kafka story, which doesn't happen at all, but still, I didn't want to exclude it, so that's why, I wanted to have the process and I want to pull it over to Rosa and her reactions.
She is summoned though, which is a very berufen kind of time.
Yeah, that's nice. That's really. But
this
is one of the difficulties. Yes, you will always, as long as you're aware of it. I'm so glad. You find the image and you realize what I'm doing. That's the first step, and whether you find a solution will always be. We would know. We might look for one there.
Yes.
Allow another question. I think we can also open this dialogue to the whole room. And obviously this is one of the texts that's probably the one that has the most interpretations in Germanistic in the whole literary scholarship, and I was wondering how you dealt with that baggage. I know, Ulrike, that in Midgift, for example, you deliberately play with the reader anticipating, this we should read through Butler, or here we should do Kristeva, and how much, and obviously Lyn, you're a literary scholar, but how much did you translate not just the Verwandlung and Kafka, but how much was present, what you no doubt know and have read Pulitzer's reading, or that the Dame in Pelz is so-and-so, and how much did you also translate the whole, well not the whole, but sort of just the highlights and the very prominent pieces of literary scholarship behind it, and sort of how did he deal with all the baggage that comes with this text in particular?
Not at all. Really. Yeah, quite amazing. I never worked on Kafka as a Germanist. I never read any secondary literature on Kafka. And I had this idea of, transgenderizing and transliteralizing this story when I was on the island of Hiddensee some summer at 6 longer ago. And there is no internet. And this was perfect. So I wrote it there. And I even quoted, I checked the photo. This was the only thing later on, and became more precise on this. And that was it. And then the faintest idea what, I'm so sorry. I'm really, it's quite unusual for me, actually. Normally, with Ulrike Draesner, you would expect the contrary, so but in this, I feel so entirely free and blemishless. Because without any blemishes, I just never, it's just realized, I never really dealt with it. How amazing, so. No, I read some of his letters, and I wasn't even very interested in his biography. Text puzzled me so much, I never got out of it.
And how about you?
I'm at the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, you must be. Kind of like
immediately called to mind Malcolm Paisley's Boehning article, and that beginning the pleasure actually. There are the interpretations that say that the white spots that appear when he scratches himself is ejaculation, and so to her pleasure, which is actually, if you Google that, I really don't Google that. I like to use Google to check, the context, the frequency of these particular collocations, and that, don't. Definitely don't do it at work anyway. And that's, you're saying you prefer something much more innocent, because of course you've got the child in the cradle, and the pleasant sensation of rocking, and even sensation, I think, is starting to start moving in other directions. But to me, that seemed okay to her pleasure. Sure, that's slightly more sexual than it is in the original, but there is that interpretation of the Kafka at least. So that was in my head. So I've got the opposite problem. I've got all of the English translations of Kafka and all the scholarship on Kafka all at the back of my head. And as I say, sometimes I was thinking, well, if I were choosing, I wouldn't translate this in this way. But I'm not sure that I have the choice here, because there are certain terms that are like uneasy dreams that are so commonly associated with Kafka that you have to do it in here. Whereas occasionally, with Flumerton,
yes,
I always do this when I'm teaching, I always end up with the legs flimmering. And that comes out as waved in just about every translation I've come across.
Yeah, but here I think translations of the Kafka might really be misleading.
Indeed. I don't think it
Because
works at all.
no, they don't. It's not a Kafka word. If I use this word, what would I think of? Of screens, of course. Bad television. That is the first use.
Flickering. Yeah.
And so the implication is that she has the feeling, there's a screen between her and her legs. It's her legs and it's not her legs. And they're blurred like bad, they're seen through a medium, and it's very, kind of bad. And actually the idea of the sight comes in again with the window in one of the paragraphs.
Yes.
And this is important as well, because here we have tiny slight differences between the German and the English. But they seem to me to be crucial, because I read a lot about what do Beatles see and how do they see. But what do we know now? And obviously they wouldn't have our vision. Everything would be on our touch, would be blurred in their vision. And what creeps onto her is in her vision as well. It's like the dimness of the Beatles' eyes, as the kind of coarseness of the Beatles' voice creeps onto her as well. Which I like. I think for me this has always been a kind of essential thing of how Kafka deals with the Verwandlung. In a way you're tempted to read like the Verwandlung is a fait accompli, and when you wake up, or when Gregor, whoever, wakes up in the morning, then you are a Beatle, but it's not true. The Verwandlung goes on. It's on the outside, but it kind of starts to move inside into your body and takes over. So in the end it's the brain, the psyche and everything. And in the end, with my side, it's the heart, we die off. And I want to show this. So the Trübe of the vision is important. In the German, where is it again? Das Fensterglas wirkte trübe, als regne es. This sentence is important because of the Wirkte, because this always, kind of brings in like the perception. And it is not, it has to seem to be, or seemed even to her, you could do this in this translation, seemed to her to be kind of. And then there might be a connection between the flimmer, the verb you choose, and the trübe you choose. I think this would make up a nice line and what have you.
Well, they both fire, don't they?
Yes,
if you've got things moving at the wrong speed,
right,
effectively.
Yeah, so this might help.
There is a fire.
This might be the process, which might lead you to valid verb in English and just forget about the translation of Kafka. Because here he would have, a very different context of using any US or blurred signs. I want to have the media quite early.
But the interesting thing is, isn't it, that so you're very focused on the perception of the Beatle, but then it gets taken over by the blog, so it gets taken over by outside view, doesn't it? And that I think is really the crucial thing in this whole story, isn't it? That it gets appropriated, and you don't get the individual's view.
Right, that's right. And this, I read along, obviously, the Kafka story and looked at it and what he's doing. And this is, we have a kind of parallel movement, like the metamorphosis into a beetle, kind of creeps into this beetle from his kind of outer shell. And at the beginning, we are closer to Gregor and his perception, so he's in the room and all this. But then Kafka starts to kind of get out as well, and the beetle becomes more of a beetle and less of the persona who we perceive the story. And that means at the end, he dies, and you don't even feel any kind of contradiction. It's quite amazing how he does it. And the family, it's the family who takes over in Kafka, because they are the ones who are alive, and the end is just telling of the free and how they kind of are liberated from the terrible beetle. And I followed this movement as well, the narrative movement. So it says, let's get away, slide away from the beetle and the inner perceptions. So it's set on the track and you feel it, and then who will be the kind of, and then it's a collective. It's not the family; it's a collective kind of perspective, made up of all these voices of Modi and the assistentin and the family, of course, as well. But they basically stumble anyway. Stumble in the
But the cruelty of the family is the same as in the Kafka text.
Yes. Yeah, it is. It's just, it takes one different.
Yeah.